Venezuela's allies, Russia and China, have sparred with the US at a meeting of the United Nations Security Council in New York. They accuse Washington of, quote, cowboy behaviour for its military and economic pressure on Caracas. The US has ramped up its military presence in the Caribbean, with President Trump announcing a naval blockade to stop Venezuela from exporting its oil. US Ambassador Mike Waltz said Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro's ability to sell oil was enabling what he described as narco-terrorist activities. Waltz also said Maduro was not Venezuela's legitimate leader.
President Trump has been very clear that he is going to use the full power of the United States of America, the full might of the United States, to take on and eradicate these drug cartels which have operated with impunity in our hemisphere for far too long, and everyone knows it. The single most serious threat to this hemisphere, our very own neighborhood, and the United States, is from transnational terrorist and criminal groups.
Jesus Renzullo is a Latin American politics analyst at the German Institute for Global and Area Studies. Welcome to DW. Now, China and Russia have condemned the US for its actions against Venezuela at the UN Security Council. So do you think, can Nicolas Maduro rely on them to help him survive the crisis that he's in right now?
Well, there is not much that both Russia and China can do. They could financially support the government while the blockade lasts. There is such a limit on how much or how long the United States government can maintain that quarantine or blockade. But Russia is not in the financial position to support Venezuela right now because it's going on with its own war in Ukraine. And it is unknown how much China is willing to keep lending the Venezuelan government. We need to remember that the Venezuelan government is the biggest debtor of China in the whole Latin America by far, even double than Brazil.
Okay, so you're saying the options for China and Russia are a bit limited there. Now, there are signs that the White House is seeking regime change in Caracas. Trump is not ruling out the possibility of a ground invasion. Is Nicolas Maduro willing to take Venezuela to an all-out war to save himself?
It is easy to say, yes, Maduro would be willing to go all out because it's about his life and about his sustaining in the government. The question is whether the regime as a whole is willing to go on all-out war, which is unlikely. Now, how likely is the government of the United States to put boots on the ground? That is a question that I think it's the most important to take into account. And I think that they're still quite hesitant, and that is why they're trying to go into economic strangulation, because they're still not willing even to go into targeted strikes in the territory.
Speaking of economic strangulation, as you say, Maduro's regime is heavily dependent on oil exports. There are reports that the US is now tracking a third oil tanker. How do you see this naval crisis between the US and Venezuela playing out?
Right now, we need to take into account that the American government is being really thorough with the persecution of the oil vessels. During the first days after the skipper was seized, there was some sanctioned vessels that entered the Venezuelan territory and get out of the Venezuelan territory. And I think the United States caught up with that. And now they are persecuting both sanctioned and non-sanctioned vessels. The most interesting thing is that even non-sanctioned vessels that are, for example, for flags from Panama, that it was the case of the Centuries, was deflagged by the Panamanian government in order to be seized. So we are seeing that the United States government is even tapping on allies that are maritime trade actors, so they can de-officialize some vessels and they can be captured. So we're talking about a serious blockade. Now we're talking about a serious quarantine. And we need to see how crafty the Venezuelan government can be in order to let the vessels or the oil flow, because if not, they're going to be in huge economic crisis, and that is going to create a migration crisis soon.
Yeah, understand. Now, is there any room for de-escalation here?
There definitely are, in part, particularly because the United States has stopped talking directly about Maduro going out. They still consider Maduro an illegitimate president, but they stopped being directly going into the topic of Maduro needs to step down, and now they're talking about oil assets and companies and money. This might be an option for the Venezuelan government to give a trade on something, provide some de-expropriation of national oil wells that the United States had before the Chavez administration, the possibility of mineral deals that the United States is really keen on, and the American government has always been like really excited about. But that would come with the idea that still some political change might have, because this is the political win that Trump is trying to make. The escalation will necessarily come with some regime reorganization inside Venezuela.
We've been speaking with Jesus Renzullo from the German Institute for Global and Area Studies. Jesus, it's been really helpful. Thanks so much for that.
Thanks to you.
And for more on this, I am joined by DW reporter Oscar Schlenker. Oscar reported from Venezuela for many years. It's good to see you, Oscar. So China and Russia have condemned the US for its actions against Venezuela. Will their support go beyond the rhetoric that we have heard from them?
Well, many experts conclude that this will not go beyond rhetoric. And in terms of rhetoric, it really hasn't escalated that much. There are diplomatic bare minimums, is what China and Russia are offering with regards to Venezuela. This emergency UN Security Council meeting was called upon by Venezuela. It's a mechanism available from the UN. So we haven't heard anything from Putin or Xi Jinping other than a birthday card and a pat on the back for Maduro. What we are seeing is that Venezuela's regime is desperately trying to show international legitimacy and that it's not isolated. But have in mind that there are UN Human Rights Commissioner just this past week condemned Maduro's regime of crimes against humanity. And there's a UN fact-finding mission on Venezuela that also published detailed report on human rights violations committed by Venezuela. So even though China and Russia tend to oppose these issues at the UN level, they were very much addressed during yesterday's meeting as well.
Right. And Oscar, there are signs that the White House is seeking regime change in Caracas. Is there a scenario in which Venezuela's leader, Nicolas Maduro, would be prepared to step down?
Well, you know, yesterday I heard one of Maduro's allies in Venezuela say that offering Maduro to step down in exchange for his safety is not something that interests him. And I agree. This is a very radicalized movement. And the only way Maduro would step down is there is some way to safeguard that the Chavista or the Bolivarian revolution keeps on. Let's keep in mind that Maduro is just part of a larger movement that does not want to hand over power under any circumstance, and they've said it out loud. So Maduro is not going to step down unless there are safeguards for the dictatorship.
All right, we'll just perhaps give it a second or so to see if Oscar... Right, Oscar, we had lost you for a second there, but I'll move on to my next question, which is for the Venezuelans who are at home in Venezuela, as all of this is unfolding, what impact is this having? We understand that the sanctions are putting pressure on daily life, so is inflation and other things. Just give us a sense of how people are being affected by all of these developments.
Well, there's already an impact on the Venezuelan pockets. People are trying to enjoy Christmas, but also save up on gasoline and stock up on food because prices are going up very rapidly, and there are gas shortages already in some states. So we could see Venezuela fall back into hyperinflation next year. We've been through it before. There are 4 years of hyperinflation. And that is an outcome that affects the common Venezuelan, but not the people in power. So there is a lot of fear that this will not topple Maduro's government, because we've seen this through the past. In the past, this crisis, and you know how much Maduro's regime can withstand.
All right, that's DW reporter Oscar Schlenker. Thank you, Oscar. It's always good to get your insights.
Merry Christmas.